The scorching sun blazed down on Camp Hawthorne like an unforgiving spotlight, turning the tarmac into a shimmering mirage of heat waves. Private First Class Rebecca Martinez adjusted her tan fatigues and tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear as she walked between the towering Humvees parked in perfect formation. At 28, she moved with quiet confidence through the chaos of military life, her polished boots clicking against the concrete with practiced precision. Rebecca worked in logistics division, the kind of assignment that kept her invisible to most of the base. She processed supply requests, managed inventory, and ensured that the real warriors had everything they needed to do their jobs. Her voice was soft but authoritative when she spoke. Her reports were always flawless, and she never caused trouble. To most people at Camp Hawthorne, she was just another face in the crowd. But there was one detail that made soldiers do a double take when they caught sight of it. Just above her right wrist, where her rolled sleeves revealed tanned skin, was an intricate butterfly tattoo. The design was beautiful and delicate, rendered in black ink with stunning detail. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a pretty piece of body art that seemed oddly out of place on a military base in the middle of nowhere. Staff Sergeant Tommy Brooks was standing in the chow line when Rebecca passed by, clipboard in hand, focused on her work. He nudged the Marine next to him and snickered. "Check out the butterfly tattoo on the logistics girl," he said loud enough for several others to hear. "What's she gonna do if we get attacked? Flutter at the enemy?" The laughter that followed was exactly what Rebecca had come to expect. She kept walking without breaking stride, her expression unchanged. She'd heard worse jokes about her ink, and she'd learned long ago that responding only made it worse. Better to stay invisible, do her job, and let people think whatever they wanted to think. The truth was, Rebecca preferred the anonymity. She'd been at Camp Hawthorne 8 months, and the routine suited her perfectly. Wake up before dawn, hit the gym, grab black coffee and scrambled eggs, then spend her days in the supply warehouse making sure everyone else had what they needed. She ate dinner alone, read books in her small quarters, and went to bed early. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. What the jokers didn't know, what nobody on the base knew, was that Rebecca Martinez hadn't always been a logistics officer. She hadn't always been invisible. And that butterfly tattoo wasn't just a pretty design she'd picked out of a catalog during a wild weekend. But she'd worked hard to bury that part of her life, to become someone ordinary and unremarkable. The secret she carried was heavier than any pack she'd ever shouldered, more dangerous than any mission she'd ever run. Some nights, she'd trace the edges of the tattoo with her fingertip and remember things she wished she could forget. Other nights, she'd dream about faces that would never age, voices that would never speak her name again. Camp Hawthorne was supposed to be her refuge, her chance to serve quietly without the weight of expectations or the burden of recognition. She'd specifically requested this assignment because she knew it would keep her far from the kind of attention that could unravel everything she'd worked to build. Here, she could just be Private First Class Rebecca Martinez, logistics officer, butterfly tattoo and all. But secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. And some symbols carry more weight than the people who wear them realize. As Rebecca disappeared into the supply warehouse, adjusting her sleeves to cover the ink that had become such a source of amusement, she had no idea that her carefully constructed invisible life was about to be shattered by a single moment of recognition. The desert wind picked up, swirling dust across the base as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. In a few hours, the temperature would drop, the base would quiet down, and Rebecca would retreat to her quarters with another day of anonymity behind her. But tomorrow would bring visitors that would change everything. And the butterfly tattoo that made her a target for jokes would soon become something else entirely. The mess hall buzzed with the usual morning energy, as hundreds of soldiers filed through for breakfast. Rebecca balanced her tray carefully, scanning the crowded room for an empty table where she could eat in peace. The scrambled eggs were lukewarm and the coffee was stronger than motor oil, but she'd had worse. Much worse. She found a spot near the back corner, facing the wall, and settled in with her back to most of the room. It was her preferred position, one that let her observe without being observed. Old habits died hard, even when you were trying to live a quiet life. Well, a voice said behind her. If it isn't our resident butterfly collector. Rebecca didn't turn around, but she recognized the voice. Lieutenant Daniel Crawford, a career officer with a reputation for being particularly hard on anyone he considered soft. He was standing with Captain James Morrison, both men holding coffee cups and wearing the kind of smirks that meant trouble. "That's some serious ink you've got there, Martinez," Morrison said, loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Very artistic. Did you design it yourself, or did you just pick the prettiest one off the wall?" A few soldiers and adjacent tables turned to look, and Rebecca felt the familiar heat of unwanted attention. She took another bite of eggs and kept her eyes on her plate, hoping they'd get bored and move on. They usually did, but Crawford wasn't done. He walked around to face her, tapping his index finger on the laminated surface of her table. "You know what I think?" he said, his voice carrying across the mess hall. "I think someone's been watching too many movies. Thinks a little body art makes her look tough." The laughter started at Morrison's table and spread outward like ripples on a pond. Rebecca could feel dozens of eyes on her now, could hear the whispered comments and stifled chuckles. She set her fork down slowly and took a sip of coffee, keeping her hand steady. "Come on, Martinez," Crawford continued, clearly enjoying his audience. "Tell us the story. Did your boyfriend design it? Some kind of romantic gesture before he deployed?" More laughter. Rebecca's jaw tightened slightly, but her expression remained calm. She'd endured worse interrogations from actual enemies. A couple of officers looking for entertainment weren't going to break her. Morrison leaned in closer. "Or maybe it's symbolic, right? Like, you're going to spread your wings and fly away from all this military stuff when your enlistment's up. Transform into something beautiful." The mocking tone was unmistakable, and Rebecca could see other soldiers gathering nearby, drawn by the spectacle. This wasn't just casual teasing anymore. It was becoming a public humiliation, and she knew that responding would only make it worse. "Actually," Crawford said, straightening up with theatrical flair, "I bet I know what it really is. It's one of those trendy tattoos that means transformation, or new beginnings, or some other inspirational nonsense. Am I right?" Rebecca finally looked up at him, her dark eyes steady and unreadable. For just a moment, something flickered across her face that made Crawford's smirk falter slightly. It was the kind of look that suggested she knew things he didn't, had seen things he couldn't imagine. "It's just a tattoo," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Nothing more." "Oh, come on," Morrison jumped in. "Don't be modest. I bet there's a whole story behind it. Some deep, meaningful reason why you chose that particular design." Rebecca stood up slowly, picking up her tray. The mess hall had gone quieter now, with more people paying attention to the exchange. She could feel the weight of their stares, could practically hear the gossip that would follow her for the rest of the day. "If you'll excuse me," she said politely, "I have work to do." She walked toward the dish return area with measured steps, ignoring the continued laughter and comments from Crawford's growing audience. But as she scraped her barely touched breakfast into the trash, she caught a glimpse of someone watching her from across the room with a different kind of attention. Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes, a 20-year veteran with sharp eyes and a reputation for seeing through nonsense, was observing the entire scene with obvious disapproval. When Rebecca's eyes met hers briefly, Hayes gave an almost imperceptible nod that somehow felt like support. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rebecca had learned to take comfort in small gestures during her months at Camp Hawthorne. They reminded her that not everyone was looking for a target, that some people understood the value of keeping your head down and doing your job. As she left the mess hall and headed toward the supply warehouse, Rebecca could still hear traces of laughter. Behind her, the butterfly tattoo felt like it was burning against her skin, a reminder of everything she was trying to leave behind and everything she couldn't quite escape. But what Crawford and Morrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that some butterflies were born from fire, not flowers. And some transformations happened in ways that would make their casual cruelty seem like child's play. The heat was suffocating by mid-afternoon when Rebecca heard the rumble of heavy vehicles approaching the main gate. From her position in the supply warehouse, she could see through the small window as a convoy of black SUVs rolled onto the base. The kind of vehicles that meant important visitors, the kind that usually had nothing to do with logistics. She was processing a routine requisition for ammunition when Corporal Tyler Jenkins burst through the warehouse door, breathing hard and wearing the kind of expression that meant trouble. "Martinez," he panted, "you need to see this." He was holding his phone, showing her a photo that made her stomach drop. Someone had taken a picture of her butterfly tattoo and posted it on the base's unofficial social media group. The image was grainy but clear enough, and the comments below were exactly what she'd expected. "Looks like Princess wants to play soldier," read one comment. "Bet she cries during weapons training," said another. The thread went on for dozens of responses, each one more creative in its mockery than the last. But it was the caption that made Rebecca's hands clench into fists. When you want everyone to know you're deep and mysterious, but you're just a supply clerk with daddy issues. "Jenkins," she said quietly, "delete this. Now." "I didn't post it," he said quickly. "Crawford did. It's been up for 2 hours and everyone's seen it. I just thought you should know." Rebecca stared at the screen, watching, as new comments appeared in real time. Her carefully maintained anonymity was being stripped away one joke at a time. Her privacy violated for the entertainment of people who didn't even know her name. She'd endured the verbal harassment, ignored the casual cruelty, and tried to stay invisible. But this crossed a line she hadn't expected anyone to cross. "Give me the phone," she said. Jenkins handed it over reluctantly, and Rebecca scrolled through the comments with growing anger. These weren't just random soldiers making jokes anymore. Officers were participating. People she'd worked with professionally were piling on, and the whole thing was taking on a life of its own. Then she saw Morrison's comment. "Maybe we should start a betting pool on what other meaningful tattoos she's hiding under that uniform." That was it. Rebecca's hands were shaking slightly as she handed the phone back to Jenkins, but her voice remained steady. "Thank you for showing me this," she said. "I need to make a call." "Martinez, wait," Jenkins said, looking uncomfortable. "Maybe just let it blow over. You know how this stuff works. Tomorrow there'll be something else for them to focus on." But Rebecca was already walking toward the warehouse office, where she kept her personal items locked in a small metal cabinet. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she'd hoped never to use again. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hayes. Sergeant Major, this is Private Martinez from Logistics. I need to speak with you. Privately." There was a pause. "What's this about, Martinez?" "It's about Crawford and Morrison violating base social media policy and creating a hostile work environment. And it's about something they don't understand." Another pause, longer. "This time, my office. 20 minutes. Rebecca hung up and stared at her reflection in the black screen of her phone. For 8 months, she'd worked to become nobody special, just another face in the crowd. But some battles chose you whether you wanted them or not. And some secrets couldn't stay buried when people kept digging in the wrong places. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the butterfly tattoo that had caused so much trouble. The black ink seemed to pulse against her skin, and for just a moment, she remembered the day she'd gotten it. The weight of everything it represented, everything she'd sacrificed to earn it. Crawford and Morrison thought they were humiliating a supply clerk with pretentious body art. They had no idea. They'd just declared war on someone who'd learned to fight battles they couldn't imagine. Someone who'd stayed quiet, not because she was weak, but because she was dangerous. Rebecca locked her personal items away and straightened her uniform. In 20 minutes, she was going to do something she'd hoped never to do again. She was going to stop being invisible. The butterfly tattoo had always been a reminder of transformation, but not the kind that Crawford joked about. It was about the kind of change that happened when you realized that sometimes the only way to protect your peace was to remind people why they should leave you alone in the first place. As she walked toward Sergeant Major Hayes' office, Rebecca could feel something shifting inside her. The careful walls she'd built around her new life were starting to crack, and what was underneath wasn't as harmless as everyone assumed. Some butterflies, she thought grimly, had teeth. Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes had an office that reflected her personality. Sparse, organized, and intimidating. The walls were covered with commendations and photos from deployments that spanned 2 decades, and behind her desk hung a flag that had clearly seen actual combat. When Rebecca entered, Hayes gestured to the chair across from her desk without looking up from the paperwork she was reviewing. "Sit," Hayes said curtly, "and explain to me why 2 officers are using base resources to harass one of my soldiers." Rebecca had prepared herself for this moment during the walk-over, but sitting in the chair across from a decorated career soldier made everything feel suddenly real. For 8 months, she'd been just another enlisted person following orders. Now she was about to reveal information that could change everything. "Sergeant Major, I need to show you something," Rebecca said, pulling out her phone and navigating to the social media post. "Lieutenant Crawford posted a photo of my tattoo on the unofficial base group. The harassment has escalated beyond verbal comments." Hayes took the phone and scrolled through the comments, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "This is completely unacceptable," she muttered. "Violates at least 3 base policies and basic professional conduct." "There's more," Rebecca said quietly. "They don't know what the tattoo actually represents. They think it's just decorative art." Hayes looked up sharply. "And what does it represent, Martinez?" Rebecca reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded document she'd hoped never to show another living soul. It was worn from being carried for years, creased along the fold lines, and bore several official seals that most people would never recognize. She placed it on Hayes' desk with hands that were steadier than she felt. "My real service record. Sergeant Major, the one that's not in the standard databases." Hayes opened the document and went completely still. Rebecca watched as the Sergeant Major's eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again as she absorbed what she was reading. "Operation Nightfall," Hayes whispered, looking up at Rebecca with new recognition. "You were part of the classified joint task force in Afghanistan." Rebecca nodded. "Calcine Monarch, designated marksman and forward reconnaissance. I served under Commander David Nash, SEAL Team 4. Hayes continued reading, and Rebecca could practically see the pieces falling into place. The document detailed deployments that officially never happened. Operations that were buried so deep in classification that even mentioning them required special clearance. "It says here you were presumed killed in action," Hayes said slowly, "along with 6 other operatives when your compound was overrun in Kandahar province. We held our position for 14 hours against overwhelming odds," Rebecca said, her voice steady but distant. Nash ordered us to fall back, but someone had to stay behind to destroy the intel. I volunteered. The explosion brought down half the building, and by the time extraction arrived, there was no sign of survivors. Hayes set the document down carefully. How did you survive? Underground tunnel system. Local contacts helped me reach a safe house, but it took 3 weeks to make contact with friendly forces. By then, the official reports had been filed. As far as the military was concerned, Monarch was Kier along with the rest of the team, and you let them believe it. Rebecca's jaw tightened slightly. I was offered a choice. Resume my classified status and return to black operations, or accept a standard discharge with a new identity and the understanding that I would never discuss what happened. I chose to disappear. Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Rebecca with new eyes. But you didn't discharge. You re-enlisted under your real name. I couldn't completely leave the service, Rebecca admitted. It's all I've known since I was 18, but I wanted something quiet, something normal. Logistics seemed like the perfect place to hide. Hide from what? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of memories that still haunted her dreams. From the fact that when that building came down, I was the only one who walked away. From the knowledge that 6 good people died while I lived. From the kind of attention that comes with classified commendations and black ops experience. Hayes picked up the document again, examining the seals and signatures. This butterfly tattoo, it's not just decorative, is it? It's the Monarch sigil, Rebecca said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the full design. Each member of the task force had one. It represents transformation through adversity, survival when death seems certain. Commander Nash designed them himself. And Crawford and Morrison are mocking a combat decoration they don't even recognize. Rebecca nodded. They think they're humiliating a supply clerk. They have no idea they're targeting someone who spent 3 years in the deepest black operations. The military conducts. Hayes stood up abruptly and walked to her window, staring out at the base where soldiers were going about their daily routines, oblivious to the conversation happening just yards away. When she turned back, her expression was grim but determined. Martinez, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Yes, Sergeant Major. Are you still capable of the kind of work you used to do? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that both women understood. Rebecca thought about the months she'd spent trying to be ordinary, trying to convince herself that she could leave that part of her life behind permanently. The skills don't disappear, she said finally. But I chose this assignment because I wanted to use different ones. Hayes nodded slowly. Well, it seems like that choice is being taken away from you. Crawford and Morrison have created a situation that requires resolution, and ignoring it isn't going to make it go away. Rebecca felt something shifting inside her, like a door she'd locked tight was beginning to creak open. What are you suggesting, Sergeant Major? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for a few people around here to learn some respect, Hess said with a sharp smile. And I'm thinking you're exactly the right person to teach them. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would accelerate everything. Rebecca was inventorying medical supplies when Jenkins burst into the warehouse again, this time with news that made her blood run cold. Martinez, you need to know what's happening, he said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. Crawford's been talking to people. He's convinced that your tattoo is some kind of stolen valor situation. Rebecca's hands stilled on the medical kit she'd been checking. What do you mean? He's been asking around, trying to find out if you ever served in combat units. Says he thinks you're wearing military ink you didn't earn. He's talking about filing a formal complaint. The irony was almost too much to bear. Crawford suspected her of stolen valor while she was actually hiding. legitimate valor that would dwarf anything he'd ever accomplished. But she kept her expression neutral as she processed this information. What kind of complaint? Fraudulent enlistment, misrepresentation of service record, conduct unbecoming. The works. Jenkins looked nervous. Martinez, if he files that paperwork, it'll trigger an investigation. They'll dig into everything. Rebecca felt the walls of her carefully constructed, quiet life crumbling around her. An investigation would uncover her classified service record, which would lead to questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Questions that would destroy the anonymity she'd worked so hard to maintain. There's more, Jenkins continued. Morrison's been talking to some of the Tier 1 guys who rotate through here. He's showing them your photo, asking if they recognize the tattoo design. Says he wants to prove it's not authentic military ink. That was the moment Rebecca realized. She was out of options. Crawford and Morrison had inadvertently stumbled onto the one path that would expose everything she'd tried to hide. Their mockery had evolved into something that threatened to unravel the new life she'd built. She pulled out her phone and called Hayes. "I need to see you again," she said when the sergeant major answered. "It's urgent." 20 minutes later, she was back in Hayes' office, this time with a very different kind of conversation ahead of her. "They're going to keep digging until they find something," Rebecca said after explaining the situation. "And when they do, they're going to find out exactly who I used to be. That's going to create problems for everyone involved." Hayes leaned forward, her fingers steepled on her desk. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where congressional committees start asking questions about why someone with my clearance level and combat record is serving as a logistics clerk on a base that's supposed to be routine assignment only. And that would be bad because," Rebecca met her eyes directly, "because this base isn't as routine as everyone thinks it is it, Sergeant Major? There's a reason Tier 1 operators rotate through here regularly. There's a reason the supply requests I process include equipment that doesn't officially exist." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca could see her weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke. "Camp Hawthorne serves as a logistics hub for classified operations throughout the region," Hayes admitted. "The soldiers here don't know it, but they're supporting missions they don't have clearance to understand. Your presence here, with your background, could raise questions about operational security." "Exactly. So Crawford and Morrison's investigation could compromise more than just my cover." Hayes nodded grimly. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we solve this problem before it becomes everyone's problem," Rebecca said. "And I'm proposing we do it in a way that ensures it never happens again. Go on." Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Hayes the social media thread again. The comments had multiplied overnight, with more people piling on and the jokes becoming increasingly cruel. "Tomorrow is the monthly all-hands briefing," Rebecca said. "Every soldier on the base will be in that auditorium, including Crawford and Morrison. It's the perfect opportunity to address this situation publicly and definitively. You want to reveal your background in front of the entire base? I want to reveal enough of it to make the point that some jokes aren't worth making," Rebecca said. "And I want to do it in a way that protects operational security while ensuring this never happens to anyone else." Hayes considered this, staring at the document that contained Rebecca's classified service record. "It's risky. Once information is out there, you can't take it back. The information is going to come out anyway if Crawford files his complaint. This way, we control how it comes out and what conclusions people draw from it. And you're prepared for the consequences? For the attention this will bring?" Rebecca thought about the 8 months of peace she'd found at Camp Hawthorne, the quiet routine that had helped her heal from memories she'd never fully processed. Then she thought about the alternative, an investigation that would destroy not just her cover, but potentially compromise operations she'd spent years protecting. "I'm prepared to do what needs to be done," she said finally. Just like I always have. Hayes picked up her phone and dialed an extension. Colonel Martinez? I need to speak with you about tomorrow's briefing. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. As Hayes began explaining the situation to the base commander, Rebecca stared out the window at the soldiers going about their daily routines. By tomorrow night, everything would be different. The quiet logistics officer with the butterfly tattoo would be gone, replaced by someone these people had never seen before. Someone who'd learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who thought they knew exactly who they were dealing with. The base auditorium was packed beyond capacity for the monthly briefing. Soldiers filled every seat and lined the walls, creating an atmosphere of barely contained energy. Word had spread that something unusual was happening today, though nobody seemed to know exactly what. Rebecca sat in the back row, wearing her standard tan fatigues with the butterfly tattoo clearly visible on her forearm. She'd deliberately chosen a seat where Crawford and Morrison could see her, and she'd watched their reactions when they spotted her. Crawford had nudged Morrison and whispered something that made both men laugh. They had no idea what was coming. Colonel Patricia Martinez took the podium at precisely 1300 hours, her bearing commanding immediate attention from the assembled troops. Rebecca had met with the colonel the previous evening to discuss exactly how much information would be revealed and how it would be presented. Before we begin today's operational briefing, the colonel announced, we need to address an issue that has come to my attention regarding conduct and professionalism on this base. The auditorium went silent. These kinds of openings usually meant someone was about to get publicly disciplined, and everyone wanted to see who was in trouble. It has been brought to my attention that certain personnel have been using base communication channels to mock and harass a fellow soldier. The colonel continued, specifically targeting that soldier's military tattoo with suggestions that it represents stolen valor. Rebecca could feel hundreds of eyes scanning the room, trying to figure out who was being referenced. Crawford and Morrison looked uncomfortable, but not yet panicked. What these personnel don't understand, the colonel said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, is that the tattoo in question is not decorative art. It is a legitimate military designation that represents service at the highest classified levels. Now she had everyone's full attention. Murmurs rippled through the auditorium as soldiers looked around, trying to identify who might be carrying classified military ink. Private First Class Rebecca Martinez, the colonel called out. Please, come forward. The auditorium erupted in whispers as Rebecca stood and walked down the center aisle toward the stage. She could feel every eye in the room tracking her movement, could see Crawford and Morrison's faces go pale as they realized they were about to learn something they weren't prepared for. Rebecca climbed the steps to the stage and stood at attention. Beside the colonel, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression calm but alert. The butterfly tattoo was now visible to everyone in the auditorium. Private Martinez, the colonel said, please explain to the assembled personnel what your tattoo represents. Rebecca stepped forward to the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces that showed varying degrees of curiosity, confusion, and in a few cases, dawning recognition. The butterfly design is the monarch's sigil, she said, her voice steady and clear. It was issued to members of Joint Task Force Nightfall, a classified counter-terrorism unit that operated in Afghanistan from 2018 to 2021. The whispers stopped completely. The auditorium was so quiet that Rebecca could hear the ventilation system humming in the background. Task Force Nightfall conducted deep reconnaissance and direct action missions behind enemy lines, she continued. Our operations were classified at levels that require congressional notification. We were officially designated as killed in action following a compound breach in Kandahar province. Colonel Martinez stepped forward. Private Martinez served as the unit's designated marksman and forward reconnaissance specialist. Her call sign was Monarch. She was presumed dead for 3 weeks before making contact with friendly forces. Rebecca could see shock spreading across the faces in the auditorium like a wave. Soldiers who had dismissed her as just another supply clerk were suddenly seeing someone completely different standing before them. The Monarch sigil represents survival against impossible odds, Rebecca said, looking directly at Crawford and Morrison in the crowd. It represents the kind of sacrifice that most military personnel will never be called upon to make. It is not decorative art. It is not stolen valor. It is a combat decoration earned through classified service at the highest levels. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Colonel Martinez spoke again. "Let me be absolutely clear," the colonel said, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "Anyone who mocks, harasses, or questions the legitimacy of classified military decorations is demonstrating profound ignorance and disrespect. Such behavior will not be tolerated on my base." Rebecca could see Crawford sinking lower in his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment and what looked like growing panic. Morrison appeared to be trying to disappear entirely. Private Martinez has served this country with distinction at levels that most of you don't have clearance to understand, the colonel continued. She has earned the right to serve wherever she chooses, in whatever capacity she chooses, without harassment from personnel who haven't accomplished a fraction of what she has accomplished. The auditorium remained silent, but Rebecca could see the shift in how people were looking at her. The dismissive glances had been replaced by something closer to awe and, in some cases, fear. Furthermore, Colonel Martinez announced, "Effective immediately, Private Martinez is being promoted to sergeant and transferred to a position more appropriate to her qualifications and experience. She will be joining the base security team with oversight responsibilities for classified logistics operations." Rebecca felt something settle into place inside her chest. The quiet life was over, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. She'd spent 8 months trying to hide from who she used to be, but perhaps it was time to embrace a middle ground between complete anonymity and the dangerous visibility of black operations. "Are there any questions?" the colonel asked, scanning the auditorium with a challenging stare. The silence continued. Nobody seemed brave enough to speak first, and Rebecca suspected that most people were still processing what they'd just learned. "Then let me leave you with this," the colonel said. "Before you mock someone's service, before you question someone's valor, before you assume you know someone's story, remember this moment. Remember that the most dangerous people are often the ones who look the most ordinary. Remember that respect is earned, not given, and some people have earned more than you'll ever understand." As Rebecca walked back to her seat, she could feel the weight of hundreds of stares following her. But this time, the attention felt different. Instead of mockery and dismissal, she sensed curiosity mixed with a healthy dose of wariness. Crawford and Morrison were nowhere to be seen when she reached the back of the auditorium. They had apparently decided that a strategic retreat was their best option. The butterfly tattoo no longer felt like a target painted on her arm. Instead, it felt like what it had always been meant to be, a reminder of transformation, survival, and the price of underestimating people who've learned to hide their true capabilities. The change was immediate and dramatic. By the time Rebecca returned to the supply warehouse after the briefing, word had spread throughout the entire base. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged her existence before now stepped aside when she walked by, some nodding respectfully, others simply staring with undisguised curiosity. But it was the absence that spoke loudest. Crawford and Morrison had vanished completely, neither showing up for evening chow nor appearing at their usual haunts. Around the base, Rebecca wasn't surprised. Public humiliation had a way of making people want to disappear, especially when that humiliation involved discovering you've been harassing someone significantly more dangerous than yourself. Sergeant Major Hayes appeared in the warehouse doorway around 1800 hours, wearing an expression that mixed satisfaction with concern. "How are you handling all this, Martinez?" she asked, gesturing toward the window where they could see soldiers gathering in small groups, clearly discussing the day's revelations. "About as well as expected," Rebecca replied, continuing to organize the medical supplies she'd been working on before her world changed. "Though I suspect this is just the beginning." Hayes nodded grimly. "Crawford filed a formal complaint this morning. Before the briefing, accusations of stolen valor, fraudulent enlistment, the works." Rebecca's hands paused on the supply box she was holding, and Colonel Martinez forwarded it to Pacific Command with a recommendation that Crawford be investigated for harassment and conduct unbecoming an officer. Apparently, his complaint included several factual errors that suggest he filed it without conducting any actual research. Meaning he accused you of claiming to be a Navy SEAL, which you never did. He also claimed your tattoo was identical to known gang symbols, which it isn't. And he suggested you were lying about combat experience, despite never actually asking you about your combat experience. Rebecca set down the box and turned to face Hayes fully. "So he filed a false complaint, based on assumptions and prejudice." "That's exactly what he did. And now he's facing a formal investigation while you've been cleared of any wrongdoing and promoted to a position that actually matches your qualifications." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. Crawford's attempt to destroy her credibility had ultimately revealed her actual credentials and resulted in his own professional downfall. But she took no satisfaction in it. She'd never wanted any of this attention. "There's more," Hayes continued. Morrison tried to get ahead of the situation by claiming he was just following Crawford's lead, that he never intended any real harm. "He's requesting a transfer to another base. And Crawford?" Hayes' expression darkened. "Crawford is doubling down. He's claiming that classified operations are being used to cover up misconduct, but the whole thing is an elaborate deception, designed to protect someone who doesn't deserve protection." Rebecca felt a familiar cold anger settling in her chest. Crawford wasn't just refusing to accept the truth. He was actively trying to undermine her credibility, even after being proven wrong. That crossed a line she hadn't expected him to cross. "Where is he now?" she asked quietly. "Confined to quarters pending investigation. But Martinez, I need you to understand something. This situation has attracted attention from higher up the chain than we initially anticipated." Rebecca's blood went cold. "What kind of attention?" "The kind that comes with classified service records being revealed, even partially. Pacific Command is sending someone to review the operational security implications of your presence here." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, more confining. Rebecca had known this was a possibility, but she'd hoped her partial revelation would be enough to resolve the situation without triggering a full security review. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. Colonel David Nash, SEAL Team 4. Rebecca went completely still. Hayes couldn't have known the significance of that name, couldn't have understood what it meant for Rebecca to hear it spoken aloud after 3 years of silence. "Commander Nash," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. "You know him?" Rebecca's mind was reeling. David Nash had been her commanding officer during Task Force Nightfall. He was the man who'd ordered her to fall back from the compound, the one who'd signed off on her presumed death when she couldn't be located after the explosion. He was also the only person alive who knew the complete truth about what had happened that night in Kandahar. "He was my CO during Nightfall," she managed to say. "I haven't seen him since the mission." Hayes studied her carefully. "Is that going to be a problem?" Rebecca thought about the last conversation she'd had with Nash. shouted over gunfire as the compound walls crumbled around them. She'd volunteered to stay behind to destroy the intelligence cache, knowing it was likely a suicide mission. He'd ordered her to find another way, but she'd already made her choice. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's been 3 years. A lot has changed." "Well, you'll find out tomorrow." He's scheduled to arrive at 0800 for a private briefing with you and Colonel Martinez. As Hayes left the warehouse, Rebecca found herself alone with memories she'd worked hard to suppress. Nash had been more than just a commanding officer. He'd been a mentor, someone who'd seen potential in her that she hadn't recognized in herself. The thought of facing him again, of having to explain why she'd chosen to disappear rather than return to the work they'd done together, made her stomach churn. But there was something else, something Hayes hadn't mentioned, but Rebecca understood. Instinctively, Nash's arrival wasn't just about reviewing operational security. It was about determining whether she was still fit for the kind of work she used to do. And given the current situation with Crawford and the attention her presence was generating, there was a very real possibility that her quiet life at Camp Hawthorne was about to end permanently. Rebecca locked up the warehouse and headed toward her quarters, acutely aware of the soldiers who watched her pass. Some nodded respectfully, others simply stared, but all of them were seeing her differently than they had 24 hours ago. The invisible logistics officer was gone, replaced by someone whose presence carried implications they couldn't fully understand. As she reached her small room and closed the door behind her, Rebecca caught sight of herself in the mirror above. Her sink. The woman looking back at her still wore the same uniform, still had the same face, but something fundamental had shifted. The careful anonymity she'd maintained for 8 months had been stripped away, leaving behind someone she'd almost forgotten. She used to be. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the butterfly tattoo that had started all of this. In the harsh fluorescent light of her quarters, the black ink seemed to pulse with meaning she'd tried to ignore for too long. It wasn't just a symbol of transformation or survival. It was a reminder of who she really was underneath all the careful camouflage. Tomorrow she would face Nash and whatever decisions came with his arrival. Tonight she would prepare for the possibility that her attempt to live an ordinary life had failed completely, and that the person she'd been before was about to reclaim control of her future. The butterfly had always been about metamorphosis, but Rebecca was beginning to understand that some transformations couldn't be undone once they'd begun. And some people, no matter how hard they tried to hide, were never meant to remain invisible for long. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as a black helicopter touched down at precisely 0800 hours. Rebecca stood at attention outside the base headquarters, wearing her newly issued sergeant stripes and trying to control the anxiety that had kept her awake most of the night. Colonel Martinez stood beside her, both women watching as a single figure emerged from the aircraft. Commander David Nash looked exactly as Rebecca remembered him, despite the 3 years that had passed. Tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, he moved with the fluid confidence of someone who'd spent decades in situations where hesitation meant death. When his gaze found Rebecca, he stopped walking for just a moment, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Martinez," he said as he approached, his voice carrying the same authority she remembered. "You look well." "Commander Nash," she replied, maintaining her formal posture despite the flood of memories his presence triggered. "Thank you for coming." Colonel Martinez stepped forward. "Commander, we've prepared a full briefing on the situation and its operational security implications." Nash nodded but kept his eyes on Rebecca. "I've read the preliminary reports. Before we discuss implications, I'd like a few minutes alone with Sergeant Martinez." They walked to a small conference room adjacent to the colonel's office, and Nash closed the door behind them. For several heartbeats, they stood in silence, studying each other across 3 years of separation and secrets. "You're supposed to be dead," Nash said finally, his tone neutral but his eyes intense. "I was supposed to be a lot of things," Rebecca replied. Dead seemed like the safest option at the time. Nash moved to the window, looking out at the base, where normal military life continued around them. "Do you know what happened after Kandahar? I know 6 good people died while I survived. I know the mission was successful because of their sacrifice. Beyond that, I chose not to know. The intelligence you died to protect prevented 3 major terrorist attacks on American soil," Nash said without turning around. "The compound you held for 14 hours bought enough time for our extraction team to recover 2 captured operatives, who would have been executed within hours. Your sacrifice saved lives, Martinez. Multiple lives." Rebecca felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen slightly. For 3 years, she'd carried the weight of survival guilt, the knowledge that she'd walked away from a situation that killed her teammates. Hearing Nash acknowledge the broader impact of their mission helped, but it didn't erase the fundamental question that had haunted her. "Why didn't you try to find me?" she asked quietly. Nash turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "We did try. For 2 weeks, we had teams combing every inch of that region. But the explosion had collapsed most of the underground tunnel system, and local intelligence suggested that anyone who might have survived would have been captured or killed by hostiles within hours. But you declared us Kia." "I declared you Kia because that's what the evidence supported, and because continuing the search would have compromised ongoing operations in the region." Nash's voice carried the weight of command decisions that had cost him sleep for years. "When you finally made contact, you were already 3 weeks gone and officially dead. Bringing you back would have required explanations that could have compromised other assets." Rebecca nodded slowly. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed helped explain the choice she'd been offered when she finally reached friendly forces. Resurrection would have been complicated in ways that went far beyond paperwork. "So you let me stay dead." "I let you choose," Nash corrected. "Return to classified operations with a new identity, or maintain your death status and build a civilian life. You chose a third option nobody anticipated. I chose service without classification. I chose to stay in the military, but step away from the black operations world. And how has that worked out for you?" Rebecca thought about the 8 months of peace she'd found at Camp Hawthorne, the quiet routine that had helped her process memories and grief she'd never had time to properly address. Then she thought about the events of the past week, the way her carefully constructed anonymity had crumbled the moment someone decided to dig beneath the surface. It worked until someone decided to investigate a tattoo they didn't understand. She said, "Now I'm right back where I started, except with an entire base full of people who know there's more to my story than they're cleared to understand." Nash sat down across from her, his formal bearing relaxing slightly. "Which brings us to why I'm here. Pacific Command is concerned about operational security breaches, but they're also interested in bringing you back into the fold." Rebecca's blood went cold. "What kind of interested?" "The kind where they recognize that someone with your skills and experience might be wasted processing supply requisitions." Nash leaned forward. "There's a new joint task force being formed. Counter-terrorism. Operations in the Pacific region. They need someone with your particular qualifications. I left that world for a reason, Commander. I know. But that world has a way of not letting go of people who are exceptionally good at what they do." Nash's expression was sympathetic but firm. "The reality is that your cover here is blown. Every soldier on this base now knows you're more than you appear to be, and that information has a way of spreading beyond base boundaries." Rebecca stared at the table between them, processing the implications of what Nash was telling her. Her attempt to live quietly had failed not because she'd made mistakes, but because other people's curiosity had forced her into the open. "What are my options?" she asked. Option 1. Accept reassignment to the new task force with full classified status restoration and a significant promotion. Option 2. Accept transfer to a different base where your background is completely unknown and commit to maintaining absolute anonymity. Option 3. Accept discharge with full benefits and transition to civilian life. Rebecca considered each possibility. Option 1 meant returning to the world she tried to leave behind, but with the knowledge and experience that 3 years of reflection had given her. Option 2 meant starting over again, but with the understanding that her past would always be a vulnerability. Option 3 meant leaving the military entirely, abandoning the only life she'd ever known. How long do I have to decide? 48 hours. The task force deployment begins in 6 weeks, so if you choose option 1, training starts immediately. Nash stood to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Martinez, I think you've earned the right to choose your own path. Whatever decision you make, you have my full support." After he left, Rebecca sat alone in the conference room, staring at the butterfly tattoo that had caused so much trouble and ultimately forced this moment of reckoning. She'd gotten the ink to commemorate survival and transformation, but she was beginning to understand that transformation wasn't a single event. It was an ongoing process, a series of choices that shaped who you became. Outside the window, she could see soldiers going about their daily routines. Some of them looked up at the building where she sat, clearly aware that decisions were being made that would affect the person they'd recently discovered was far more than she appeared to. Rebecca thought about Crawford, probably still confined to quarters and facing the consequences of his assumptions and prejudice. She thought about Morrison, likely counting the days until his transfer came through. She thought about all the jokes and mockery that had started this whole situation, and how none of it mattered now that the truth was out. But mostly, she thought about the future and what kind of person she wanted to be moving forward. The quiet logistics officer had been a comfortable identity, but it had also been a form of hiding. The black operations veteran was a dangerous identity, but it was also the most honest version of herself she'd ever been. The butterfly tattoo caught the light streaming through the window, and Rebecca made her decision. Some transformations couldn't be reversed, and some people were never meant to stay hidden for long. It was time to stop running from who she really was and start embracing who she could become. 3 days later, Camp Hawthorne held another all-hands briefing. This time, Colonel Martinez announced that Sergeant Rebecca Martinez had been selected for reassignment to a classified position that would utilize her specialized skills and experience. The announcement was met with respectful silence and a few scattered nods of approval. Crawford had been transferred to a desk job at a training facility stateside. His career effectively ended by his own prejudice and poor judgment. Morrison had gotten his requested transfer, but would carry the stigma of the incident with him to his new assignment. Rebecca packed her belongings methodically, leaving behind the quiet life she'd built but taking with her the lessons she'd learned about the cost of hiding from yourself. The butterfly tattoo no longer felt like a burden or a target. It felt like what it had always been intended to be, a reminder that survival wasn't just about making it through the worst moments. It was about choosing who you wanted to be when those moments were over. As her helicopter lifted off from Camp Hawthorne, Rebecca looked down at the base where she'd tried to be invisible and instead learned that some people are never meant to disappear. The desert stretched out below her, endless and unforgiving, but full of possibilities she was finally ready to embrace. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.